Yes, a very good evening to everybody, and I welcome all of you. And thanks to all who have joined us today evening, and all even the faculty members, as we get on to optimal sequencing for a better survival in the outcomes in hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, metastatic breast cancer. So it's warm greetings from Freedom from Cancer as we move towards today's educational webinar. I know we are facing a big pandemic, but still, in spite of that, we do our services and to help the cancer patient carry on their treatment. So it's an educational program, and I hand over the mic to our chairperson, Dr. Venkatraman Radhakrishnan, a medical oncologist from Chennai, and I request you to introduce the speaker. And also, I would like to have your expert comment after every speaker. Thank you, Dr. Venkatraman, for joining us.
Thank you, madam, for this opportunity. Again, thank you, Novartis, for this opportunity. So we have an exciting program lined up for today. And we have come a long way in estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. Initially, it was tamoxifen. Then we had fulvestrant. Then we have aromatase inhibitors, and then cyclin-dependent kinase inhibitors. And finally, the common pathway of resistance in this patient has been the PI3K kinase pathway. So we have inhibitors for the same as well. Thereby, patients have more choices now and are living for a longer time. So our first speaker today would be Anas Medical College, and he'll be talking to us about actionable biomarkers in advanced breast cancer. I would request this, and we will take it up at the end of each talk. So I hand over the mic to Prof.
Hello,
Ye-
can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Anita, madam. Thank you, Venkat. Already, Venkat pointed out that we are moving from an era of tamoxifen and then fulvestrant and letrozole and then CDK inhibitors, and then we are going towards molecular testing, and then we are moving towards better treatment line for the metastatic breast cancer patients. In this line, we are going to deal about PIK3 mutations in this. And then molecular portraits of human breast tumors, luminal subtype. Luminal A subtypes accounts for around nearly 35 to 40% of patients, and then luminal B accounts for nearly 25 to 30% of patients. Here expression is more in luminal A type, and then only 2 plus in the luminal B type. Here expression is also 3 plus in luminal A and 1 plus in luminal B. And then PIK3 expression is, K67 expression is low in luminal A type, and luminal B is around more than 14%. And then PIK3 mutations are more in 43%, around more 43% in luminal A type, and only in 29% in luminal B type. And then prognosis according to molecular subtype, that is the luminal A is always better prognosis. All of you know that the relapse-free survival as well as the overall survival is very good in luminal A subtypes. This is the genomic landscape varies among the subtypes of breast cancers. Nearly 510 patients have been analyzed in this. In that, they found out that nearly PIK3 mutations are there in nearly 36% of patients, and P53 accounted for nearly 37%. The tumor profile may vary in the and the response to treatment. Initially, there is oncogenesis, and then after treatment, there will be some residual disease. Then the residual clones will develop some kind of mutations, and the patients are relapsing, and then the residual disease is very little. At this point of juncture, we have to do something to treat these patients. As the tumors evolve, the tumor profile in metastasis does not necessarily correlate with the one in the primary tumor. That may be a different kind of mutations in metastatic tumor cells. Changes in ER status is around 20 to 30%, 33%, and HER2 status is around 5 to 8%, depending on the series we have analyzed. The mutational landscape of ER positive metastatic breast cancer at progression. They have analyzed all the mutations, TP53 mutation, GATA3 and estrogen receptor mutations, and then also PIK3 mutations. Changes in hormonal and HER2 receptors in primary tumor and metastatic biopsies. A meta-analysis they have done, they showed that there is a change in the ER status, receptor status in 24% of patients. That is, from positive, ER positive, they changed into ER negative. And then from negative, they changed into positive when they did the second biopsy and analysis. In the progesterone receptor, from positivity to negative, they found out that 46% was there, and then from negative to positive, 15% was there. In the HER2 status, 13% changed from positive to negative, and from negative to positive, the analysis was showed 5%. The breast cancer genomic in the metastatic lab settings. Then they did a survey among the medical fraternity whether they are doing tumor genome sequencing in all the patients. Almost very few people are using this tumor genome sequencing. This is an upcoming investigation modality to treat further in the metastatic breast cancer patients. This is an Aurora study design. They collected samples and then they did molecular screening, and then after treatment again in disease progression they did again, and then after treatment again they are collecting the samples and they are storing in the biobank for future research projects to study the evolution of metastatic breast cancer over a period of time. Then this is the Aurora data follow, screening and central lab evaluation. Molecular advisory board, we are doing the analysis, and then they are doing the analysis, and then feedback to the clinician has been given depending upon the reports. And then they are storing the data for future studies and research. Among the cancer subtypes, around 43 patients didn't showed any mutation subtypes, that is molecular alterations, and nearly 57% of patients showed some type of molecular alterations. Mainly PIK3 mutations accounted for nearly 30%, and then estrogen receptor mutation 8%, AKT 6%, and then ERV mutations and BRCA mutations for some percentages, and then MLH around 0.3%, and KRAS and some percentage. Then molecular screening of ready for daily, what we are doing for daily practices, and then at least one alteration they have identified in around 51% of patients in these patients in Aurora population. PIK3C mutations in breast cancer. There are mutations in PIK3C, the gene that encodes the alpha isoform of PIK3, P110 catalytic subunit are present in approximately nearly 40% of patients. Then multiple coding regions, but mostly exon 9 and exon 20, they have noted nearly 80% of the mutations occurred in both the exons. PIK3C alterations are implicated in PIK3 pathway activation in breast cancer. PIK3 alterations include both somatic and gene amplifications. And then the frequency of somatic mutations is around 18 to 40%, and then gene amplification is around 10%. The PIK3 mutations are oncogenic as well as they cause the tumor growth both in vivo and in vitro. And then they are more common in hormone receptor positive disease than in basal-like tumors. Then PIK3 amplification has been shown to lead increased PI3 activity. That is the pathway that we are going to deal. There is the alpha subunit that the PIK3 is the enzyme is having, it's a heterodimer with a regulatory as well as a catalytic subunit. The catalytic isoforms has 4 expression patterns: alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Mostly the alpha form, that is the most frequently altered isoform in solid tumors, that plays a prominent role in the signaling pathway. Then SAFIR study showed that PIK3C mutation is associated with poor prognosis. When compared to mutant PIK3 and when with wild type is death and progression, and after induction chemotherapy, they showed that the death and progression is less in the wild type and compared to the PIK3 mutant population. As well as the overall survival is better in the PIK3 wild type forms, 23.5 months when compared to the mutant type, 19.6 months. Then impact of PIK3C mutation on everolimus efficacy in hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative advanced breast cancer primary tumor samples they have taken. From Bolero 2 trial participants, they have analyzed the mutations level. Then this everolimus and exemestane did the median progression level was better in the wild type when compared to the mutant type. And then again, they did the analysis in the Paloma 3 patients. Again, PIK3C mutations patients. CDK inhibitors did very well in both the wild type as well as in the mutant type. There is not much of difference in the outcome. And then Transnational Breast Cancer Research Consortium group study showed that progression-free survival with palbociclib plus fulvestrant or tamoxifen in chemo pre-treated patients by ESR, that is estrogen receptor mutation or PIK3 mutation studies showed that wild type, the median progression-free survival was better in the wild type when compared to the mutant type. And then again in the estrogen receptor mutation status also they showed that wild type did a very progression-free survival when compared to the mutant type. Then FDA approved the PIK3C mutations, alpelisib, and then patients positive for PIK3 mutations in plasma had a similar progression-free survival when compared to tissue-based survey. Both median progression-free survival in both the tissue as well as plasma samples is around 11 months. And then should it be plasma or tissue for PIK3 mutation? Tissue wherever is available. And then all eligible patients, FDA is approving a formalin fixed paraffin embedded assay for PIK3C mutation first, if available. Then if mutation is there, then PIK3 inhibitor is approved for this. If no mutations, we have to go for other approved therapies. Patients who have exhausted all previous tissue samples, FDA now approved plasma assay for PIK3C mutations. And then if positive, then PIK3 inhibitor is approved. If no mutations, we can go for again rebiopsy to do that. This is the NCCN guidelines 2020. HER2 negative and hormone receptor positive patients, PIK3C mutations, you can do either blood or tissue block if blood is negative. And then, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kannan, for that wonderful talk. So I have a question from Dr. Suman Kalyan, who has asked that PIK3 kinase status change with tumor evolution like ERPR HER2. In other words, is it okay to do PIK3 kinase testing in initial tissue, or is there need to rebiopsy at progression? That is, can you do it on the original blocks, or do you need to biopsy at progression before you start a PIK3 kinase inhibitor?
Preferably, if rebiopsy is possible, we can go ahead with rebiopsy and do the mutational analysis because the pattern is changing. Yeah. But I don't think there are no studies to compare the previous biopsy samples and the new biopsy samples to compare both the mutational analysis in previous sample as well as in the rebiopsy samples, preferably in the rebiopsy sample, if possible.
I think, Dr. Suman, it's better to rebiopsy because many patients acquire this mutation as a resistance to ERPR.
Yes.
So you might not find mutation in initial upfront biopsy specimen, but you might find patients who have been on Palbo or Letro developing this PIK3 kinase mutation. I had one question. Does the PIK3 kinase mutation status vary according to the race or the country? Is it more in the east or western part of the world? Is it similar across all countries?
I think we don't have any data in the Asian population. I think everything is Western literature.
Okay.
Anybody from the audience know that? Anybody from the audience know that is there any difference in the population?
Venkat, can I talk?
Yes.
Please. Yes. Everybody is free to participate. Please talk.
Whether the PIK3 mutation is indicated upfront in de novo disease or it is indicated only in the metastatic relapse setting, second line, third line, because the alpelisib for the PIK3 inhibitors is right now is not approved in the front line setting, is approved only in the second line, third line setting. So really you have to go and do a PIK3 mutation upfront at the MBC de novo.
I don't think so, because it is not approved upfront, and
It's not
I think the rate of mutations upfront is quite less compared, because it's an acquired mutation. So currently there's no indication to do PIK3 kinase mutation.
So
Sir.
PIK3.
Bharat is saying.
Yeah,
Bharat,
sir, you can take any of the tissue. If you see, we have two studies for, one is a solar study, one is a BioLeaf study. Some of the archival tissue has also been taken. So in metastatic setting, if you get a fresh tissue, that is the best thing. But if you don't have it, you can do it on archival tissue. Basically, what you said is PIK3 mutation. At the end of the day, it is PIK3 which is present, but once it acquires like first line, second line, it is the acquirance of the additional mutations. Probably that makes it as a go-to drug. But first line, since we have a safer CDK4/6 inhibitor, it is better to give the drug in a second line. Although the SOLAR study was a first line study, but if you see, we have a safer drug that is CDK4/6 inhibitor, and the data is now there like BioLeaf study post CDK4/6 inhibitor. So whenever the treatment, you can give it as a first line, but since we have a better and more safer and maybe more effective drug in a first line, we normally keep it in the second line.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Bharat. We'll move on to the next talk now. We are bang on time. I'd invite Dr. Arun Kumar from MedGenome to talk about the know-how of PI3K kinase testing.
Thank you, doctor. I will just share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Thank you. Yeah. Very good evening to one and all. I thank the team for inviting me for this talk. So I will be sharing certain aspects of molecular testing and the laboratory aspects of PIK3CA testing and various technologies available for it. So this is the agenda for today's presentation. So the background, which has already been covered a bit, is about the PIK3CA, which is essentially a kinase that is there on the surface of the cell, and it targets, or the PIK3CA activation leads to mTOR pathway activation, leads to cell growth, motility, survival, angiogenesis, etc. So, and it has also been observed that mutations in this pathway is leading to resistance to variety of anti-cancer therapies. So PIK3CA is a group of plasma membrane associated lipid kinases, and it consists of three subunits, the two regulatory subunits P85 and P55, and the catalytic subunit is the P110. So based on the substructures, it's basically classified as 1A, 1B, 2, and 3. So the class 1A is the most commonly occurring PIK3s, and in this you can see these two blue chains are the regulatory subunits, and this is the catalytic subunit, which is what we are targeting. And the PIK3 is actually, as I said, lipid kinases, where it gets activated upon binding of a receptor tyrosine kinase to its ligand, which could be any of the growth factors or the receptor tyrosine kinase, and it activates the mTOR pathway, and it also activates the same receptor tyrosine kinase can also go via the RAS-RAF pathway. So the catalytic domain of the PIK3 is essentially having these domains, the P85 binding domain, RAS domain, C2 helical, and the kinase. And in breast cancers and in also a variety of cancers, gain of function mutations have been observed in specific exons of the PIK3CA gene. And you can see that the exons 7, 9, and 20 are the most commonly mutated regions of the PIK3CA, especially the C420th amino acid position, 545, 546, and 1048 account to almost 90-95% of all gain of function mutations in the PIK3CA gene. So the rationale for testing PIK3CA in breast cancer is that it is mutated in almost 20 to 30% of breast cancer cases, depending on the type of breast cancers. And in an early breast cancer setting, PIK3CA mutations are associated with better invasive disease-free survival. And in HER2 positive tumors, PIK3CA mutation correlates with a lower pathological complete response rate. And PIK3 mutated hormone receptor positive and HER2 negative metastatic breast cancer patients have a poor outcome and resistance to chemotherapy is observed, which is essentially the therapy against the HR positive cases. And that resistance is because of constitutive activation of the PIK3CA, which is accumulating secondary mutations, and it leads to the constitutive activation of the mTOR pathway. And finally, as has already been described, the mutated PIK3CA gene is targetable, especially in the cases of hormone receptor positive and HER2 negative PIK3 mutated metastatic breast cancer cases following a first line of therapy. In addition to that, a recent study has identified that double mutations in PIK3 is not quite uncommon. And they have shown that the overall response rate to PIK3CA inhibitor was very high in PIK3CA double mutants rather than single mutants. So they have found that in single mutant PIK3CA, the overall response rate in the cells were 18.1%, whereas the double mutant PIK3CA had a higher response rate. So again, if at all we come across any patients with double mutate PIK3CA, the response may be a bit higher. So this was again already showed. The NCCN guidelines for PIK3CA shows that in HR positive and HER2 negative cases, PIK3CA mutation is applicable, and of course the alpelisib is available along with fulvestrant, and preferably the second line of therapy. Now, the methodology of detection that NCCN recommends is PCR-based testing either in the blood or in the tissue block. If the blood is negative, which essentially is the cell-free DNA testing, then you can do in the tissue block is what the NCCN says. PCR-based or a broader molecular testing panel can be applied. So FDA has approved a real-time PCR-based testing for PIK3CA detection. That is called as the TheraScreen kit, which is essentially targeting 11 common mutations in the PIK3CA. And that is a companion diagnostic kit that is approved by US FDA. The TheraScreen PCR kit is essentially a real-time PCR kit that is based on ARMS primers. That is amplification refractory primers are there. That is primers specific for each of the 11 mutations that are there in the PIK3 targetable by this assay. So this is a set of 11 mutations in the exons 7, 9, and 20. Both liquid biopsy and tissue samples can be tested using this kit. And the limit of detection is that for tissue samples, the range is between 2.4% to 14% in among the various mutations in the tissue sample. Whereas the limit of detection is a bit higher when it comes to liquid biopsy, where you need to have a minimum 1.82% detection limit to 5.31% among the various mutations. So the same kit can be applied for both tissue as well as liquid biopsy. So the tissue is essentially, the sample is formalin fixed tissue with a minimum 20% tumor content. Liquid biopsy is basically blood in specific tubes called as Streck tubes, where the consistency of the cell-free DNA is very good. So this is how a report of a TheraScreen PCR report looks, and it starts with the basic demographics, and a brief clinical history is given, followed by the detailed positive or negativity of the 11 mutations that are detected by this kit. So this is a report of a liquid biopsy where a mutation in the 545th position E to K is identified in the exon 9. And the clinical significance of the mutation is given along with the corresponding clinical trials, and the methodologies are given in detail, and the certain limitations and the signatories come later. Another way of doing this PIK3CA testing, apart from this TheraScreen, which is the FDA approved methodology, is also by covering it in next generation sequencing. So interestingly, in one of the cases of PIK3CA, which we had done by sequencing, we found 2 mutations in the same patient. One is in the 545th position, the other is in the 1047 position, both of which are targetable, both of which have a approved drug target. And interestingly, we found that both of them to be at a frequency of almost 6.4% in the subject, almost very similar frequency. And the frequency was much less, 6 or 7% only each. and both of them were detected. So this is a classical case of double mutant PIK3CA, which is not quite uncommon in the patients. So there were no variants of uncertain significance, and we go on to describe about this variant in the report, where these are the two mutations, and both of them are gain of function mutation and pathogenic variant. And they have a minor allele frequency of 0.008% and 0008% in the exact database, and not reported in healthy population database. So essentially, the point I would like to convey here is that PIK3CA mutation testing can be done both at a liquid biopsy setting as well as at a tissue setting. And that can be done either by real-time PCR, which is a FDA-approved technology, or it can also be done by next-generation sequencing. The minor advantage of doing by NGS is that it has a sensitivity a bit 2 or 3% more than the real-time PCR. And by NGS, you sequence the entire gene, not the 11 hotspots. So these are some of the references, and I thank you, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Dr. Arun Kumar, for that wonderful lecture.
Thank you, sir.
I don't see any questions in the chat box, but I would like to ask you that suppose if somebody, we do a liquid biopsy and it comes negative.
Yeah.
Would you recommend for us to go and get archive tissue?
Yes, doctor.
Just like you do a T790 in lung cancer?
Yes, doctor. Yes. Liquid biopsy always has this limitation. There are certain tumors which by innate biology don't spread much of circulatory tumor DNA. So if the patient has one such tumor, the negativity could be actually a false negative. So that is always a limitation of liquid biopsy.
Anybody else has any questions? Is there any gold standard method for detecting PIK3 kinase mutation? Or do you want to do an NGS or a PCR, or both of them are equivalent?
With respect to sensitivity, both of them are equivalent, doctor. But since that FDA has approved this TerraScreen kit, we are using that also. But there is always a marginal advantage of doing it by NGS, because even mutations apart from these 11 mutations can also be targeted, which can come up in almost 4 or 5% of the cases. It's possible.
So is this PCR kit is a companion diagnostic to the alpelisib?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Pardon, is there somebody who wants to ask a question? Okay, thank you very much. We move to the third topic, and I invite Dr. Bharat Vaswani, senior medical oncologist from Yashoda Hospital, Secunderabad, who's going to talk to us about proven strategies for improving overall survival in hormone receptor positive metastatic breast cancer. Over to you, Dr. Bharat.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Most important, are my slides visible and am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right. So here we go. So the topic, first of all, let me thank the organizer, Anita Madam, for giving me the chance. The topic that I am discussing today is a simple topic with 15 slides, why which should be. So the topic is the proven strategy for overall survival in hormone receptor positive, HER2/neu negative advanced breast cancer. And I am trying to concentrate my talk on ribociclib or Clexane. Now, what we know is single agent monotherapy, what we call as single agent hormonal therapy, at best, whenever we give in the first line, around 30% of the patients are de novo hormone resistant. So they may not respond at all. What we also know is, at best, when you give a single agent hormonal therapy, the best responses are in between 20 to 35% as per as all the landmark trials. Now, when you look into the control arm of your Paloma studies or your Mona studies or your Mona Lisa, the PFS is around 12 to 14 months at the best. What we also know is in a high risk subset, when we call as high risk is a patient with a visceral metastasis, a brain metastasis and a younger, at best, these single agent hormonal therapy has a limited responses, or they may not respond at all also. And at best, when you see the control arm of all these studies, the survival is between 30 to 40 months. So what it suggests is single agent hormonal therapy in a de novo hormone receptor positive metastatic breast cancer may not be the right way to proceed. Hence, we need more than a single agent hormonal therapy for our treatment. This diagram has been discovered multiple times about it. For a cell cycle to proceed from G1 to S phase, it needs transcription of important genes. This is done through E2F protein transcription. Now, in a normal state, this E2F is bound to retinoblastoma RB genes and it is in inactivate state. Now, for the E2 protein to get freed, the RB gene has to get phosphorylated. And this phosphorylation is done through stimulation of cyclin kinase 4 and 6 receptors. Normally, cyclin kinase 4 and 6 receptors, these kinases are bound to cyclin D, which we call as a controller protein. So whenever there is a stimulation of this cyclin 4 and 6, there is a phosphorylation of retinoblastoma, E2F gets freed, and the cell proceeds from G1 to S phase. What happens in breast cancer is there is a continuous stimulation of this CDK4 and 6. So a continuous phosphorylation, E2F is always freed, and the cell keeps on progressing from G1 to S phase. Hence, we need something which can control this cyclin kinase 4 and 6, and that is a topic of my discussion. A very simple question, 5 explanation. Why should we have 3 drugs available with us now? Palbociclib, abemaciclib, and ribociclib. So I have put a question when I am telling why should ribociclib be the preferred option when combined with endocrine therapy in treatment of hormone receptor positive carcinoma of breast. So whenever you say a drug is good, you need to have 5 things most important. Most important thing is you should have a documented phase 1 evidence of a improved PFS, improved OS. OS is something that we look for now with the latest. This drug should be useful in high-risk subsets. This drug should be safe. 4th. And the 5th most important thing was what our ESMO or magnitude of clinical benefit scale has shown is quality of life is as important as the quantum of benefit. So does this drug satisfy in all the 5 aspects, or do we have any drug which can satisfy all these 5 aspects? That with all I'll be telling. Now, this is the first point, why ribociclib should be the first line option preferred. Its preferential binding for CDK4 to CDK6 is better. You have abema also, but this also drug has a very good binding to CDK4 than 6. And this is clinically more important because we know that CDK4 receptors, these are more on breast, and CDK6 is more on hematopoietic tissue. So if you have a better binding on CDK4, it will preferentially inhibit better breast cancer cells. The second important thing is at what we say cellular level, this drug has the highest plasma drug concentration. So if you look into it, the highest concentration as compared to Palbo and Abema is 22 nanomolar. So 2 advantages of this drug, why this works very well is because of its selective binding to CDK4 and its higher plasma concentration as compared to other drugs. Now let us recollect our data about the overall survival. There are 2 pivotal studies that has been conducted in ribociclib. The first landmark study, which I'll be discussing, is I have only put 1 slide, just concentrate on this slide, is a Mona Lisa 7 study. The only study which has included only pre and perimenopausal. They were randomized in a 1:1 to ribo with the AI versus initially some tamoxifen group was taken, which was later discarded because tamoxifen can cause QTc prolongation. So LHRH agonist with what we say AI. Now the most important thing was there was better overall response rate, nearly 10 to 15 times % better. But what was more heartening was the primary endpoint. The progression-free survival improved from 13.8 to 27.5 months with the reduction in the risk of progression by 43%. But what was more heartening was an improvement in OS. This is the only study, I am repeating myself, this is the only study in a phase 1 setting, single, which has shown improvement in OS in a first line So there was a heartening 30% reduction in the risk of death in terms of OS. Now, the second study that I'm discussing is a Mona Lisa 3 study, but the aim of the study was to see whether fulvestrant in the first line or fulvestrant in the second line, when combined with ribociclib, was there an improvement in PFS and or OS. So what they observed was consistently, when you look into the first line, 50% were first line, 50 were second line. There was an improvement in PFS from 19.2 to 33.6. In fact, this 33.6 is the highest PFS in a first line in any of the study. You think of Paloma, you think of Monarch. This is the highest, 33.6 months. And there was a reduction in the risk of progression by around 46%. But again, the most heartening thing was there was an improvement in overall survival by 30%. So it reduced the risk of death by 30% when used in the first line. Hearteningly, if you see in the second line also, the PFS improved from 9.1 to 14.6 months with the reduction in the risk of progression by 43%. So consistently, 40 to 45% reduction in the risk of progression. But more importantly, that I want to concentrate is around 30% reduction in the risk of death when you give ribociclib in the first line. Do you have a data in other drugs? The answer is no. Paloma 2 or a Monarch C has not shown any OS data till now. So the only CDK4/6 inhibitor which has shown as a level 1 in a phase 3 setting is the ribociclib. So I have told you 2 points about its potency and the only drug to have shown OS in both the settings in 2 different studies also. Now, if you see the incremental benefit, if you see the PFS benefit in all the studies, it is around 5 to 10 months. But if you see status post-progression, if you see the OS benefit, it is far better. So it is around, when you see the incremental benefit, it is difference is 7 to 10 months. But if you see status post-progression, survival, SPP is survival post-progression, it is around 2 years more. So what it suggests is this drug has a carryover effect in the sense that it improves your progression-free survival too also. And the incremental benefit in OS is far, far greater than what you have in a PFS, telling that this drug in fact works or this effect carries over in the second line of treatment, including the second line hormonal and or chemotherapy. Is there a survival advantage in high-risk subset? So if you look into the subset, there was an improved survival in first as well as second line as per as Mona Lisa 3. 60% of the patient in this study had a visceral metastasis, consistently telling that even in high-risk group, the incremental benefit is the same. In fact, if you see, I'll be telling you, those patients with the liver mets, see the cohort of patient in Mona Lisa 3 on the left side and Mona Lisa 7 on the side. This quantum of benefit, this progression-free survival, if you see OS was 70.7, but this benefit is better than the overall population. So there was a reduction in the risk of death by 38% as against 30% in the overall population, if you remember. And in in 7, it was furthermore. So it was 37% relative reduction in the risk of death in patient with liver mets in Mona Lisa C and 47%. And if you remember, overall, it was 0.7, so 30%. So what it suggests is that the quantum of benefit in those with a high risk, including those with liver mets, is there in ribociclib. What about brain mets? This is new, you have to remember. Till now, what we know is Abema works in CNS mets. Does ribociclib work? So this was an ESMO presentation where they have taken out a real life, if you remember, complement study in the patient with CNS metastasis. How did this was asymptomatic CNS mets? So the response was in fact better than the overall population in complement, 42%, but was more heartening was the clinical benefit rate. If you see overall population 64.2, if you look into this population 61. So this is a second drug apart from Abema which has shown that this drug in fact have a very good response rate in those with the CNS mets. More importantly, the benefit rate is as good, around 60% have a very good benefit rate. So the third advantage is it works in high risk, including liver mets, where it bears the quantum benefit and also in CNS metastasis. All good things have a bad things also. So what about side effects? So I will like you to concentrate on I have done a table. If you look into the side effects, there are two major side effects that we see in ribociclib. One is a neutropenia, and second is what we say liver-related problem and a QTc prolongation. But if you look into the grade 4 toxicity, it is only noteworthy is neutropenia 10%, but others are only 1 to 2%. And that can be adjusted by doing a dose modification. But the most important thing is just see into it. How much is the dose discontinuation rate? So the only drug or the drug with the least discontinuation rate is ribociclib. See Paloma study, see your MONAR study. 19%, 9%. Here it is 7.5 and 4%. I am not telling a drug is good. This is a good drug, but yes, the side effects profile is manageable and the discontinuation rate and the grade 3 toxicity is probably the least among all the 3 drugs mentioned till now. Every drug, this is something that we have tried to realize that over a period of time, it is not only the OS or a PFS which is important. Quality of life is as important as this. So if you see the 3 data of MONALEESA 2, MONALEESA 7 and the Paloma 2, the only phase 3 data which has shown improvement in a phase 3 setting in terms of quality of life is MONALEESA 7. So this is a drug which has shown improvement in PFS, OS and now quality. If you look into Paloma 2 or if you see MONAR study, there is no study which has shown that a drug improves your quality of life. So a median time to treatment deterioration by global health scale by more than 10%. It was prolonged significantly when you use ribociclib in the first line. It was statistically significant. If you look into the pooled analysis, this is also presented in this ESMO, a pooled analysis of MONALEESA 2, 3, 7, time to deterioration by 10% as well as to the OYA or RTC class. It was delayed by, so treatment with ribo, with endocrine, delayed time to deterioration by global by 10%. More importantly, in terms of pain score and emotional functioning, it was further delayed when you use ribo ET. So you have 2 data, you have a MONALEESA 7 and you have the pooled analysis, which showed both consistently that it delays time to treatment deterioration. The only drug that has been mentioned in the annual report of progress against cancer from the American Society of Clinical Oncology. The only CDK4/6 inhibitor that has featured in this is ribociclib. What it has suggested that MONALEESA 7 in this drug has shown improvement in OS. The thing is, we have 3 good drugs, but the only drug which has shown in a phase 3 setting with a level 1 evidence of OS advantage. I'll be telling you how, and every guidelines have told what I am telling. Now, ESMO has now become very clear. What you calculate is magnitude of clinical benefit scale with a score of 5, where 3 is allotted for PFS, 1 is allotted for OS, and 1 is allotted for quality of life. So the only drug to show a magnitude of clinical benefit score of 5 is ribociclib. I have told you this is a diagram taken from ESMO. Ribo plus ET, first line premenopausal, efficacy 4, improve quality of life, MCBS is 5. See the other drugs. Even in second line setting, it is 4. But now, so of all the 3 the CDK4 and 6 inhibitors, the only drug which has shown the score of 5 is ribociclib. There is no other drug which has shown efficacy in all the 3 things. So that was my 5th point I will be telling. So what do I summarize? What is the drug? It can use in a premenopausal as per as MONALEESA 7, postmenopausal as well as in MONALEESA 3. With AI, it is MONALEESA 7. With fulvestrant, MONALEESA 3. AI sensitive, again a MONALEESA 7. AI resistant, that is a subset of MONALEESA 3. So in all these subsets, ribociclib is a drug which has shown overall survival improvement in all the subsets. You can think of it and you remember the drug. And other drugs, if you have seen, has not shown improvement in the first line at least. Second line, yes, we have a data of Avini. So if I have to summarize 5 things I told, and I am reiterating or repeating. It is a more potent CDK4 than 6 inhibitor. Only drug with a level 1 evidence of improved survival in phase 3 setting in pre and postmenopausal. Improved overall survival in high-risk subset, including liver mets, where the quantum of benefit was more, and also in CNS with the complement study. The drug has a manageable toxicity with the least discontinuation rate of 2.5 to 5 to 7%, least among all the three. And the icing on the cake is the only drug to have the magnitude of clinical benefit score of 5. Based on this findings, I may think of giving a ribociclib as a first-line drug in all my de novo hormone receptor positive advanced breast cancer. I thank you all for a patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Bharat, for that wonderful lecture. I have one question, two questions actually, from the chat box. One is by Dr. Girish. He wants to know Palbo versus ribociclib cost-wise.
So cost-wise, I think so. It is a lesser cost. If I remember, when you see the cost of Palbo, it is, when we even get a discount, it is 75 to 80,000, and ribociclib is around 60,000, 55 to 60,000. And you all have these schemes after 10 months of your treatment. So in terms of cost-wise, 30% less cost with ribociclib as compared to palbociclib.
Okay, Dr. Bharat. Dr. Purvesh Parvik sir wants to know about cardiotoxicity of these drugs.
Excellent, sir. Best question. Now, what we say is, whenever you started this drug, your QTC should not be more than 480 milliseconds. So if your QTC is more than 480 milliseconds, you don't give this drug. Now, if you see the data, in around 1.5 to 3%, there were some QTC prolongation, but this was not a cause of death first thing. And probably if there is a QTC prolongation, if it goes beyond 480 seconds, you have to stop this drug. But this was not clinically significant in any of the studies that we have done, whether it is a MONALEESA 3 or MONALEESA 7. So this is one of the side effects mentioned, but this has not shown any significant impact in mortality also, and or disease or drug discontinuation rate. But the incidence is anywhere between 1.5 to 3% in all the pivotal studies.
Thank you very much. I have a question for you. See, the best results with your CDK inhibitors in frontline have been obtained with fulvestrant. And you have your PI3 kinase inhibitors, which is approved with fulvestrant. So would you use fulvestrant upfront? Because if you use it, then you might not be able to use it.
Sir, actually, if this question would have come 6 months back, I would have told you. But sir, now we have a phase 2 randomized study, which is called as Percival study. Now, actually, this study is the only head-on study which has compared AI with a CDK4/6 versus a fulvestrant with a CDK4/6. Basically, this was a study which we suggested, which was tried to compare superiority of fulvestrant over AI, but unfortunately, it was negative. Then they tried to compare the inferiority, which was also not there. So if you ask me, I will keep fulvestrant as a second line only with a PI3K inhibitor, because in a first line setting, in a randomized phase 2, AI plus CDK has been found to be not even not inferior, but you can not call it as a superior only. And what the trial suggested, Percival study, that you should keep on continuing AI with a CDK4/6 only. Although this MONALEESA sheet shows, but I will still prefer a AI with a CDK4 in the first line and keep a fulvestrant with a PI3K as a second line as per as my BYLieve study.
Absolutely, even I agree with you.
Venkat, can I talk?
Yes, sir, please, sir.
Yeah. The CDK4 inhibitor plus fulvestrant is better with a high risk subset of individuals. The AI plus CDK4/6 inhibitors, preferably, we don't have any head-to-head comparisons. But
there is a phase, sir, Abhi, the data, there is a randomized study that has come in this ESCO 2020, sir.
Yeah, but the high-risk subsets are the one which requires the fulvestrant plus CDK4 inhibitors upfront.
Dr. Jovita has a question. Is CNS cover better with Abema compared to ribociclib?
Sir, if you ask me, the data is there for Abema as a single agent also, and in some of JM, the study was there. What was it is, if given a chance, Abema as a single agent can be given. But if you are using in the first line, and if you have a patient with a CNS mets, you should be confident enough of using a ribo also, because because now we have a data to suggest that in a real-life setting, as per as complement, that those patients who had a CNS mets, they did equally well as the rest of the population. Now, can you give a CNS? You can use both of the drugs, sir. The problem with it is Abema doesn't have a level 1 evidence in a first line.
Yes.
The evidence is only of a PFS benefit as per as Monarch 3, plus quality of life improvement is also not there. So in a first line setting, if you have a patient even with a CNS Met, I may give it ribociclib as per as my complement study data. Second line, yes, you have 3 options and you can choose among the 3. But in first line, you should use ribo only because that is a added on advantage of this drug as compared to others.
Thank you, sir. That was brilliant. We will move on. I will invite Professor Anita Ramesh, a senior consultant medical oncologist from Savitha Medical College, to talk about PI3K kinase inhibitors. Over to you, madam.
Yeah, thank you. Can you see my slides and can you hear me?
Yes, madam.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you so much, Dr. Venkatraman, and thanks to all the speakers and Kavina Creations for having all of us together. So let's start on the new kid in the block. You have lots heard about the CDK4 inhibitors, where to use, how to use, which is best, which is economical, and which scores over the other as per the NCCN guideline. Now, I'm sure many of your patients are going to fail definitely after these cases. And it's a matter of 12, 18, 24 months, and they are back into your OPD. What do you do? Previously, we didn't have much choices, and that is the time when we tried to give some chemotherapy, change the hormones, and continue. But recently, there has been an update, and there is another pathway, that's the PI3 kinase, mTOR, and AKT pathway, which does regulate multiple cellular processes. And if you see the signal transduction pathway in the cytoplasm, even PTEN is correlated with it, and all of these pathway leads to particularly the P27, then the FOX, so many bad pathway, MD, M2 pathways, and all are activated when the patient undergoes progression and there is mutation in the pathway. And that's how the growth, survival, proliferation, metabolism, and angiogenesis takes place. So we need to do something to stop the PI3 kinase pathway and to downstream the AKT, including the mTOR pathway. And that's the discussion for today's evening. So let's look into the prognostic role of the PI3CA mutation in the breast cancer. As and when the metastasis progresses or the patient progresses on therapy, we do get the emergence of the PI3 kinase mutation in HR positive or HER2 negative patients. And once it is there, as you have seen the previous diagram, there is a decreased survival. So it is also associated with obviously with the lower progression-free survival when they are treated with endocrine therapy and with targeted drugs. So what do we do to these patients? So in the hormone receptor HER2 negative locally advanced breast cancer, 40% does suffer the mutation as they progressed. And these are some of the studies, particularly our well-known Monarch, Belly, Bolero, MONALEESA 372, and Paloma study in the plasma as well as in the tissue, and the DNA samples analyzed demonstrated approximately 40%. And that's quite a big number. And it's also worrisome because so much of the patients would definitely fail. So let's look into the key trials of targeted therapy, hormonal therapy, and the HER2 negative, hormone receptor positive, and how do we do the progression, look into the subgroup analysis. Now, if you see, all analysis show here, the exception of the SOLAR one were exploratory, looking into the, when the PI3A kinase mutation is there, definitely the progression-free survival was, and the post-progression on ET trials also demonstrated that. Now, endocrine resistant of the hormone receptor HER2 negative breast cancers, both in the Paloma 3, Bolero, Belly, and Sandpiper, though we don't have the drugs in the Sandpiper and the Belly with us, but definitely the other drugs are also available, and they have a significant p-value of 0.002 when you have the combination of an hormonal therapy with the PI3 kinase, a combo when it's used in the mutated. And in particularly the central line shows us the mutated area, and there's a definitely improvement in the progression-free survival when you compare to whole as well as the wild type of PI3CA kinase. So let's see how the development of the PI3 kinase inhibitors took place in the solid tumors. So initially you had a PAN, PI3-mTOR inhibitors, then you have the, which was discontinued, and then you have the buperlisib, which is another drug. Next is discontinued when we went to talilisib, again discontinued, and alpelisib is the isoform specific drug which is available, and it increasing the PI3 kinase selectivity. Okay, next please. Oh, sorry. So next is the ASCO. If you see the tasilisib after a week data, because the patient had severe side effects and it was not in market. Even Novartis pulled off this hand for buperlisib, again, because withdrawal due to unforeseen disadvantage. So both these drugs for which the comparison was available is not available. What we have with us is the SOLAR trial, SOLAR 1, which is the phase 3 randomized trial looking into in a patient with recurrent progression, as we have seen the case with the prior AI. And what we look into the tissue, both archival as well as fresh tissue, preferably better to do a biopsy at this point of time and look for PI3 CA mutation status. Patient should have a measurable disease and a reasonably good performance status to take the therapy. So mutant and non-mutant, the drug is alpelisib 300 milligram OD to be given daily, along with the injection was fulvestrant was used. So we looked into progression-free survival, even overall survival, and progression-free survival in the different subgroup, and response rate and safety. And even the proof of concept was when we analyzed the progression-free survival in the non-mutant group of the PIK3 kinase molecule. Now, if you see this write-up by popular Hope S. Rugo in Breast Cancer Focus, so it says that in the blood testing is negative for PI3 kinase mutation, the FDA specifies that the testing should be done and occasionally reveal an undetected mutation. And one decision that arises in which the tumor sample to choose for testing. So given that the PI3 kinase mutation may be acquired during disease progression, and the testing of the tumor to be done to get the best. So that's what it is that, as I have told you before we started SOLAR discussion, is that do a fresh biopsy and subject that tissue to the PI3 kinase. Okay, and if this mutation gets acquired, it's not present in the tumor at diagnosis, but as the tumor progresses, so it's acquired on disease progression, and preferably to do the test on a recent sample. Now, if you see the mutant, non-mutant, those which received the alpelisib and those which did not, almost the similar characteristics in both sides. Let's look into the progression-free survival. The primary endpoint of the locally assessed in a mutated population was definitely 11 months compared to 5.7 months in the placebo, which did have a one-sided p-value quite significant, less than 0.005. The progression-free survival by the line of therapy, okay, how many therapies has been over, and in the PIK3C mutant population, definitely it was 11 months compared to, if it is first line, it is 11 months compared to 6.8. If it is second line, even the big difference of more than 7 months was there, 10.9 months compared to 3.7 months. So that's how even in the first line, in the second line, and in subsequent line, it has proven its benefit. Best percentage change in the sum of the target lesion, the diameters based on the local investigator assessment, showing a good amount when percentage and decrease in the target lesion. The PI3A mutant tumors did respond much better, and it was almost 75% decrease compared to the control arm, which has just 43%. So that's one important thing. So the amount of percentage, because at some point of time when the patient is symptomatic, what you need to do is that how much of response and how fast have you been able to get it. Now let's look into whether this patient had received CDK4 and 6 inhibitor or without a CDK4. But if you see both the curves, that they are nicely diverging, and if it's with even if the CDK4 inhibitor has been given, it is 5.5 months compared to 1.8 months, and even without, then also 11 months and 6.8 months. So previous treatment with or without isn't a stratification factor. However, the difference was small, whether you received or not the CDK4/6 inhibitor, still also there's treatment benefit with the alpelisib, regardless whether you have used it or not. So that's something quite impressive, and we can think of even bringing, and I'm sure over a period of time in the first relapse, we will start assessing PI3 kinase inhibition is possible or not, and it may move into a more earlier line. So let's see the mutational analysis in SOLAR-1, and the mutational status, as I told you, best to be determined in a fresh tissue sample. Plasma DNA was collected to do PCR, but used to assess, was also used to assess, particularly if you are not able to get a tissue. Yes, liquid biopsy is an option. And if you have the tissue or the plasma DNA to determine the mutation status, definitely both the ways, whether if it is determined, this graph shows that even your PI3 CA mutation status, though detected by a ctDNA, still the progression-free survival, the curves separated, and it was statistically significant, giving approximately, if you see the chart, 10 to 11 months, whether it is plasma or whether it is tissue, showing that the plasma is an equally valid option if your tissue is not available and you're not able to get a fresh sample. Now let's see the overall survival in the patients with these mutated cohort was prolonged by 7.9 months when alpelisib was combined with the fulvestrant. So it was one-sided, and I think the p-value was around 0.01. But over a period of time, the curves did merge together, and we need to wait for some more time for getting a report. When we did a small analysis for the overall, for the subgroup analysis, and if you see this table, most of them, except the lung and liver metastasis, might, yes or no, both favored placebo, but most of the things favored the alpelisib, including your endocrine status, your lines of management, CDK status, ERPR status, everything favored. Bone-only disease, all favored the alpelisib arm, and maybe an option to go forward. Now, as I told you, lung and liver metastasis, that showed more favorable to the other side. Yes, you see the curves merging together, and then, but 37 months compared to 22.8 months, but at the end, near the second year, they were converging with each other. So when you want to go to analysis with the PI3 mutation done in the plasma ctDNA, yes, definitely an OS 34.4 months compared to 25.2 months was depicted in this. And regardless of what way the PI3 mutant has been detected, yes, definitely it showed a benefit. Now, if you see, this is a chart showing the first new antineoplastic medication after discontinuation of the study. And so CDK4 inhibitors was the first new antineoplastic after discontinuation, and then patient went over to that arm. Time to first chemotherapy, a median delay of 8.5 months was observed in patient who had the alpelisib and fulvestrant, okay, compared to the placebo and the fulvestrant arm. Progression-free survival that's a time from randomization to the first documented disease or progression, okay, was the, and definitely it was PFS2 was 22.8 in our area of interest compared to the placebo for 18.2 months. And updated adverse reaction. Yes, no drug is without. Definitely we did have, but grade 4 hyperglycemia. Yes, hyperglycemia is one thing one needs to be very careful about. It is for 3.9% of the patients, and rashes are observed 53, and 4.9% did have in the combination arm. But most of them were with grade 1, grade 2, no major toxicity with this drug. Now, if you go by the PS benefit with the alpelisib versus the placebo was maintained in the patients requiring the lower dose, because sometimes you might have to come down with the dose, and 5.5 months and the 8.2 months, the median density was less, but still when even in the lower, which is the alpelisib less than 248 milligram per day, still the improvement was 9.6 months. As far as safety is concerned, most common grade of the adverse events were in the alpelisib arm, like hyperglycemia, rash, and diarrhea, and rest of them were reasonably tolerated. But one has to be very you have to be aware of this hyperglycemia and treat accordingly. And that's the graph showing the mean fasting blood glucose over a period of time and baseline metabolic diagnosis status. So anyhow, we all do the blood test. HbA1c has to be done, and 87% of the patient with the hyperglycemia can be managed with anti-diabetic therapy. And we also have to have a physician with us to monitor this. So how this hyperglycemia comes? So the PI3 activates the AK3 downstream signaling involved in the several cell signal transduction pathway, and particularly they also have an effect with the IGFR, that's insulin growth receptor factor, for release of the growth hormones, and which in turn cause gluconeogenesis. And based on this, the hyperglycemia induced by alpelisib, happens because of the inhibition. It's reversible, and once comes back once the alpelisib is discontinued. Rashes, yes, rashes occurs. We do give the anti-rash medicines, corticosteroids, antihistamines, and emollients also go away with the prophylactic anti-rash medications, but it should not be a difficult thing to again. So that's the three things we need to do: hyperglycemia, diarrhea, and rashes. Rashes does not need any dose adjustment, even with grade 1, grade 2. If it is grade 3, interrupt, restart, use oral antihistaminics and corticosteroid. In stage 4, if it is grade 4, we stop it. And if there is diarrhea, we all know how to manage. Grade 2, give a gap and restart. 3, also give a gap. If it is 4, then patient may need hospitalization, and then we take a call whether we discontinue the drug. And same with hyperglycemia, as I told you, it is reversible, manageable. Oral drugs are enough. Okay, and again, monitor. If it is still uncontrolled, you might have to discontinue. So there's a discussion about how to look into the SGLT receptors, which are the alternative strategies to treat the hyperglycemia, use of the SGLT inhibitors for this. So that's another thing to be discussed, because if the hyperglycemia is not under control. Now, this is a chart which recommends how to manage. And so, as I told you, definitely we will assess for the diabetes and fasting blood sugar. Yes, postprandial one definitely, but HbA1c is a better marker which gives you over a period of time the sugar control. Give rash, skin rash prophylaxis with oral antihistaminics as well as emollients, and even steroids a little later. And these prophylactic anti-rash decreases the frequency of the rash and makes it a more preferable drug to continue. If it is increases, then triamcinolone, that is the steroids, and betamethasone can be used. And for the hyperglycemia, the drugs which can be used is metformin, thiazolidinodones, and DPP4 inhibitors can be used. And for diarrhea, loperamide is the drug. So let's look into the BYLieve study results, where alpelisib plus fulvestrant in the PI3CA mutated hormone receptor positive HER2 negative advanced breast cancer who had failed the CDK4 and 6 inhibitors. So that's the arm where the CDK4 with AI and CDK4 arm with fulvestrant with C, alpelisib was there. So patient was enrolled, and patient who progressed on or after AI or received chemotherapy, that was its arm C. Equally balanced on both sides. So let's skip all this. And primary endpoint for progression-free survival, and the secondary endpoint was looking into the median survival. So the best percentage change from the baseline of the tumor size of the tumor by the BYLieve, those who have received the previous CDK4 inhibitors with AI and now on fulvestrant, did show 70% decrease in the best response. Even in the SOLAR study, we have seen already 75%, and it's almost 70% in the BYLieve. So all this demonstrate that there's an increased potency for the overall response rate and the tumors. Now, if you see the discontinuation rate, okay, if it is almost, it's less than 20%, treatment related was 18%, and okay, and leading to dose interruption was definitely there, around 60%. And if the CDK is the cohort A, and all the grades, the commonest grades has been noted is diarrhea, hyperglycemia, nausea are commonly with them. The adverse events leading to discontinuation with the dose intensity with the SOLAR study, again approximately around 20%. So the median relative dose intensity for alpelisib was almost 89.9%. We were maintained, only in 10% or more we did have to decrease the dose. Whereas in the SOLAR study, with the tolerability and the dose intensity of maintained till 83.7%. So it's reasonably above 80%, we were able to maintain the dose. And please remember, they have finished their first line, second line, and almost in the second and the third line. So tolerance also will be a little lesser. And so if somebody has been able to take the drug more than 80%, is quite good. So difference in prognostic factors of progression-free survival were mitigated by 3 different matching weighting techniques to the baseline in the real world data of these patients. And they looked into, if you see the chart, letrozole, everolimus, chemotherapy, CDK4 and fulvestrant treatment arm in the real world patients, as we see over here, and the BYLieve also, and the other standard treatment. Definitely all the figures doubles by unadjusted, weighting by odds, scoring and exact matching is definitely, there is a difference almost half. So the matched analysis compared the BYLieve with the real world data of the standard treatment, which also supports the use of alpelisib plus fulvestrant. So before I conclude, we have a patient, typical, it's 2 fits in this, and I think we were the first person to start with alpelisib on this patient in Tamil Nadu as soon as the drug was approved, and she was a metastatic breast cancer, and she had liver disease. She was hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative. Initially, we have started her on letrozole and ribociclib. Yeah, we started on that. She did well for 11 months. At the end of 11 months, the liver lesion started increasing, and the tumor in the breast subsided, but the tumor, we didn't operate on her, and the tumor started increasing. Then and it's couple of 4 or 5 months back, we got her admitted, and we spoke to the family. The family is full of doctors, and also they are politically related, so finance was not an issue, and we had the surgery done. We also did an RFA to the liver lesion, and we now started her on fulvestrant alpelisib, and it is almost 3 to 4 months she's on the drug. Once only I got, because there are too many doctors, oral drugs, they manage on their own. They are on WhatsApp with me. The first 2 weeks, the phone call I got was hyperglycemia. But I didn't have much of headache because there are too many doctors. They all manage their hyperglycemia. As of now, I don't get any phone calls. So to know that not much of side effects are there, and she's doing fine. And we are expecting to a scan in the end of December, which will be 6 months on her with alpelisib. So to conclude, 7.9 months, I mean, something big. And in somebody's life, may not be for everybody, but there is a definite portion of the society who needs the drug, maybe a small portion, but yes, we have a drug proven by our SOLAR 1 study, and compared to the placebo, it was much better. Subgroup analysis showed an overall survival benefit. Adding alpelisib delayed the time to first chemotherapy or time to failure. There was a prolongation on progression-free survival. There was a meaningful clinical efficacy was demonstrated by BYLieve study, okay, in post-progression once you fail the CDK4 and AI. A matched analysis also showed a strong progression-free analysis in all the standards. And concluding, it's quite a safe drug. Yes, we have something to offer to our patients when they fail this. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for that wonderful talk. Any questions from the audience? Madam, I have a question. So
Yeah.
people, a lot of our patients are diabetic. They have comorbidities. Are they more prone for this hyperglycemic problems than patients who are non-diabetic? Do we start with a lower dose for those patients?
No. One thing, Dr. Venkataraman, you have to control the sugar before you start. Okay, I have only one case, so I do not know non-diabetic or diabetic, but definitely sugar has to be controlled before you start. Once it is controlled, and we also tell them once in 2 weeks to meet the physician to get it controlled. And I told you the drugs available, but definitely it will happen with everybody. Okay, but you have to get the treatment.
I'll add on one point. Nowadays, the data, you do a baseline glycosylated hemoglobin. If it is less than 5.7% only, you start this drug. What you see in the initial part of SOLAR study, there were around many pre-diabetics. That means the glycosylated hemoglobin was between 5.7 to 6.4. Nowadays, you don't take these patients also. So whenever we start with this alpelisib, our glycosylated hemoglobin should be less than 5.7%. Then only you put this drug on. Basically, the insulin works through PIK3 pathway, and if you inhibit it, it has to be what we call as hyperinsulinemic state. You have insulin in the body, but it doesn't work on its target. Hence, you need to control it to less than 5.7 before we start this drug.
So that might take a bit of time, no?
That we have to do it, sir. Now that the guidelines have come, if it is 5.7 less than, if it is more, you have to control it, go down to less than 5.7%, and then you, because that complication goes down very well if you see the modification.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we move on to the last talk of the session. It's a panel discussion chaired by Professor Rajkumar from Madurai. On to you, sir, and you can introduce your panel.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Venkataraman, and thank you, Anita and Novartis, for giving me this opportunity to have a panel discussion on the optimal sequencing of the drugs, various drugs. Now we've got options are plenty now. It's really plenty in HR positive, HER2 negative breast cancer. And I have a very great panel members with me, Dr. Jovita, Dr. Baswani, and Dr. Suman, and Dr. Raja. So I like my panel members to come switch on their video so that you can have a live interaction with them. So today, the panel discussion is going to be on the optimal sequence of the drug. As Venkat was talking, once the drug options were either the AI or the tamoxifen, depending upon the menopausal status, now we have choices plenty, and all the hormone responsive tumors has been started on endocrine therapy upfront, unless otherwise there is a visceral crisis or organ dysfunction. So the first line of choice will be either a now we have moved to a era of targeted agents plus endocrine therapy, and down the line these patients do develop resistance for these endocrine drugs, whether it is CDK4/6 inhibitor or any other combinations of ET plus CDK4/6 inhibitors. Down the line these patients do require chemotherapy. Some point of time they may require chemotherapy. From this all these didactic lectures, now we move to the real world situation where I'm going to present a very interesting case where we learn how to integrate these, how to sequence these drugs, and when to incorporate the chemotherapy, whether how to delay the chemotherapy by sequencing the optimal sequencing of the endocrine plus targeted agents. My next slide, please. So this is a very interesting case. Right now I have the patients, I'm following it for the past 1 year or so, but the patient has got a diagnosis, a case of 50-year female, a postmenopausal, CA left breast, diagnosed in the year 8th month of 2018, treated elsewhere outside. The performance status was 1. She had a comorbidity of diabetes and hypertension. Patient was started treated elsewhere. So patient was started on patient found to have a tiny lung nodules in addition to a locally advanced breast mass infiltrating the chest wall as well as the underlying the pectoralis major. So the treating physician thought it could be a tiny metastatic lung mass of a doubtful significance. So he started on neoadjuvant chemotherapy with the dosimetry, epirubicin, cyclophosphamide, zoledronic acid. The patient probably had a good response or so. Then patient underwent a left MRM. Next slide, please. This is the infiltrating ductal carcinoma breast. Kindly bear with me that I have little time to strike off the name of the patient. It's not intentional. So it is this HP was infiltrating ductal carcinoma. Next slide, please. So Rachna is also there. Thank you, sir. That's what I told. Could all the panel be switch on their video so that I can see them and have a live interaction? So it was ER positive, PR negative, and the HER2 was IHE was 2+. So the fish was done, which shows as negative. So we have a ER positive, PR negative, and a HER2 negative. So what is this double positivity or differential positivity? We have ER positive, PR positive. Does it have any difference in your choice of endocrine therapy upfront? Can I have Suman? You vote for the differential positivity. Does it have any endocrine resistance upfront? Suman?
So therapeutically, there is no difference. Even if it's 1+, it is plus. But prognostically, I have read some studies which shows if it is pure PR plus and patient is premenopausal, then they have a poor prognosis and increase in brain mets. But then generally, on a therapeutic point of view, we don't differentiate between ER plus and PR plus.
So
and
even
luminal A, differentiating between luminal A and B, there is a difference. If it is high ER plus and PR negative, only then they become luminal A. Otherwise, they become luminal B. I think that's the one difference. Other than that, I don't see
Jovita, you have any, what will be your take on the differential positivity or the differential expression of the hormone receptors? Jovita?
Yes, sir. I see that the PR negativity will confer a kind of resistance to the ER positivity. So even though we may consider this particular subset as a ER positive and go ahead treating them, the treatment might eventually fail just because of the fact that the PR positive is going to, PR negativity is going to have a negative impact on the drugs. So that is one thing. And obviously, as Suman said, this particular group comes under the luminal B. Quite often we do see the scenario. And this particular group, especially with a young lady and with just the ER positivity and a PR negativity, actually it is a very poor group, poor prognostic group.
Okay, Dr. Rachna, you agree with both the members? Dr. Rachna? What is your
Yes,
take?
sir. I agree with them, sir. Though it is prognostically a bad group, but the treatment part doesn't change with the PR positivity or negativity.
We are talking in terms of the biology of the underlying, the phenotypic expression of the hormone receptors. The biology, does it makes any difference? Any differences biologically? The tumors are different. They behave different.
Yes, sir. As the doctors were saying, that it belongs to the luminal B group, which is comparatively a poor prognostic compared to the luminal A subtype. So biologically, there is a slight difference. So
we will go to the next slide. So this patient was treated with the taxane plus anthracycline with the zolinic acid 4 cycle of neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Next slide, please. So patient underwent an MR. The post-op HP shows the classic invasive ductal carcinoma is a high-risk group, T4B and 3M0. The lung mets, tiny lung nodules was considered to be insignificant, LVI present. So patient received once again a taxane-based chemotherapy in the adjuvant setting. The patient was subsequently received the PMRT and the patient was put on anastrozole. Endocrine therapy, that's the first line choice of the anastrozole. Next slide, please. This is the time when the patient, I saw the patient. Down the line, after 1 year, patient was on 1 year, more than 6 months of anastrozole, 6 months of chemotherapy, and around 6 to 7 months of chemotherapy. Then subsequently, I saw the patient in 2019 in my hospital. This time, as you can see, patient has got an extensive lung cancer. The breast tumor is increasing. Patient has got a bone metastasis as well as lung metastasis. Next slide, please. For the panel members, so what you do now? Patient is not in any organ dysfunction. The liver functions are normal, lung functions are normal. So will you go for the chemotherapy choice of chemotherapy, or an AI plus CDK4 inhibitor, or it's a fulvestrant plus CD4 inhibitor, or a fulvestrant alone, or an AI alone? Patient have already been exposed to anastrozole. What could be the choice? Jovita?
Yes, sir. I would definitely contemplate to use a CDK4/6 with the ribo along with the letrozole, since anastrozole has already been given. And if she's a premenopausal lady, isn't it? So I think we have strong robust data on that.
She's a postmenopausal.
She's a postmenopausal. I'm sorry about that. Okay.
She was put on anastrozole. She has received anastrozole because she is a postmenopausal.
Okay. I just slipped in mind. I think that will be the best choice as of now.
Suman?
Sir, if the patient doesn't have any pleural effusion, I guess.
Right now, the patient does not have any pleural effusion. Patient has got lung metastasis, extensive lung metastasis, bone metastasis.
Yes, sir. So my agent of choice will be C, that is fulvestrant with CDK4 inhibitor in this patient.
Okay. Why you want to have a fulvestrant for CDK4 instead of a patient has been already exposed to AI? That was the reason why you choose a SERD.
He has primary hormonal resistance. He's already on AI. I guess using a different, switching over to a different agent makes logic.
Oh. Rashna, do you call this is a primary endocrine resistant tumor or a secondary endocrine?
Yes, I would consider it as a primary endocrine resistance, considering only 6 months of therapy being given as adjuvant therapy.
So you also go with the fulvestrant for CDK4/6.
Yes, fulvestrant plus CDK4.
Which CDK4/6 inhibitor? Got any preference out of the three?
Ribociclib, sir.
Since the meeting is sponsored, what is you want to say?
No, sir. With the fulvestrant and ribociclib data is compared to the other trials, it's better. It's not a direct comparison, but cross-trial comparison, we have a better.
In the three inhibitors, so anyone will go, no problem. Arumugam and Raja, you agree with that? You want to put the patient on, or you want to have a chemotherapy, choice of chemotherapy, Arumugam, Raja, rest of the panel members? Or you want to have anybody want to have a CDK4 in? Hello?
Yeah. I want to go for C only, fulvestrant CDK4 inhibitor.
Arumugam, is there? Okay.
So anybody in the OPD, sorry.
Anybody want to have a one and only a CDK4/6 inhibitor? Abemaciclib? We have Monarch 1 data, is there? Anybody want to go a single agent CDK4/6 inhibitor? Or you want to have a combination with along with the other endocrine therapy? Okay, everybody vote for fulvestrant for CDK4/6 inhibitor. Next slide, please. So, Rashna, what is your aim now? You want to achieve you want to have a PFS, you want to have a response, or you want to have an overall survival? You are more bothered about the toxicity profile. Patient has got a diabetes and hypertension, so comorbidity, 50-year-old postmenopausal. You want to think in terms of quality of life. Already patient has got a bone and lung mass. So what is your aim as a second line primary endocrine resistant tumor? Rashna?
Rashna ma'am, you'll have to unmute your mic.
Yes.
Sorry. You'll have to do it again. Sorry.
Yeah. So.
What is your aim?
Can you hear me? Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I would consider overall survival to be my aim, sir. The quality of life is also the thing.
But you have only out of 9 trials, we have only 1 trial which supports the overall, the rest of the trials are only showing the PFS advantage.
Yes, sir.
So you aim for overall survival. Yes. That's the reason you go for a ribo plus fulvestrant.
Yes, sir.
So Suman, what is your aim?
Since we, as you told, since we already have a drug which has overall survival, I'll be eyeing that, because these patients, when we give effective treatment, they go on for years together, unlike other tumors. Suppose if it's a lung or other tumor, brain, I'll be looking at PFS. Breast cancer patient, they just go on for about 4 or 5 years, even a primary endocrine disease. So I'll be eyeing OS, in fact.
So patient has got a diabetes and hypertension. The cardiac profile is okay. Echo is normal. So you want to have any other choice other than ribo is good, or you want to stick on with the ribo because it's got an overall survival advantages with the 1 trial?
Right now, it may not be the time to establish ribo as the agent of choice when we talk about OS. But then other practical advantages are there with ribociclib, I feel. One is ease of dose adjusting. So it comes in 3 tablets. So once they develop side effects, dose adjusting is very easy compared to.
How often you find the myelosuppression? How often you find the neutropenia as one of the complication of
in my experience, the incidence as well as the recovery is much lesser. I mean, incidence is much lesser with ribociclib compared to palbociclib. And Abima recently started for 2 patients, so I don't have much experience. But compared,
how often you have to make a choice of stopping the drug and stop and go, the drug interruption you need?
Palbociclib I have stopped for 3 patients. Ribo I have not stopped any.
So neutropenia is one of the important side effect.
Recovery from neutropenia, I think, is faster with ribociclib. I don't have any evidence for that, just a practical experience. So within a week or maximum of 10 days, they recover. And the depth of neutropenia also is much lesser with ribociclib. That's what I feel.
Jovita, your experience is managing the toxicity profile of ribo with the neutropenia being a bothersome one?
No, sir. Actually, I found ribo pretty safe, and the patients have really tolerated well, thank God. And one additional point I would like to add, and as to your first question, is that obviously all the 4 parameters are important, but as Dr. Rachna said, though OS is important, PF is absolutely the data that we have happens to be a very good surrogate, surrogate parameter when in a place where we don't have an OS data. So I think we can very well go ahead with the PFS of whatever we have and choose ribo at this point.
Okay.
I have one patient with ribociclib where we had increased transaminases. That's why we need to reduce the doses of the ribo.
It requires a dose modification.
Yeah.
Okay. I have quite a number of patients on ribo, but so far I haven't seen a transamination. It's a most common side effect toxicity profile versus the neutropenia, which may require a drug interruption. This is what little bothersome with the ribo is you need to stop and go. Okay. But as Suman was talking about, the recovery time is little faster when compared to palbo. The ribo's recovery time is faster from the neutropenia, and it's manageable. Next one. So we started on Crixana plus fulminate plus zolinic acid since the patient has already been exposed and found to have a resistance for AI. So we started on Crixana plus fulminate plus zolinic with the high dose of fulminate of the 500 mg IM first month, followed by 250 mg on subsequent month. Patient was started 9/2019. From 9/2019 to around fourth month of still the COVID pandemic came, the patient was on Crixana plus fulminate plus zolinic acid, but subsequently for the month of during the COVID pandemic, the month of April and May, where the Madurai had a very high incidence of pandemic and the lockout was that the patient was not able to have, so because of the personal problems. So 1 month she skipped the Crixana. That is whether it's insignificant or what. Then subsequently, the patient turned up with me in the month of 6/2020. For around 1 year, she was on Crixana. Next one. In 6/2020, she 1 month, 1 to 1.5 months, she skipped with taking Crixana. But 6/2020, she presented with the pleural effusion and she underwent a pleural paracentesis. So this time she had a progression of the disease. No. Rachna, you want to continue the CDK4/6 inhibitor? There are some data showing that you can continue the CDK4/6 inhibitor even on the progression. You want to continue, or you want to switch over to the different type of CDK4 inhibitor? Or now patient has got a pleural effusion. You want to have a chemo, choice of chemo, or you want to have anything else?
If the patient is symptomatic for the pleural effusion, she's then,
she was symptomatic. She was symptomatic. Surely, that's why we did a pleural paracentesis. It was a significant pleural effusion.
If she is symptomatic, then I would like to go for chemotherapy at this point of time, rather than continuing the CDK4 because the interruption was just for 1 month and a rapid progression during that 1 month.
Yeah,
I would prefer to change the therapy.
When you agree that this is the right time to introduce your chemo, even a HR positive tumor, or you go for any other choice of any other targeted agents?
Sir, at this time, I would like to have a biopsy. To see
you want to do a redo biopsy?
Yes, sir, because she was HER2 2+, and she progressed with.
No, she was not HER2. IHU wise, she was HER2 2+. Fish wise, she was negative.
It was negative.
Fish was negative.
Yeah, we need to look at that again, like whether she has.
You want to redo. We want to redo the
biopsy and
yeah.
PR HER2 status along with PIK3 status also.
Okay, you want to do now? You want to do the PIK3 status using the new biopsy specimen?
Yeah, ideally, even when she progressed as a primary resistance, but if it was not done, I can do it now. If she practically these patients when they progress at this time, they'll have only a fusion third space collection. And
you got any experience of switching over to different CDK4 inhibitor when patient is progressing on one CDK4/6 inhibitor? You want to switch over? You get some benefit out of that, or you don't get any benefit?
Side effect profile, I switched to 1 or 2 patients, but on an efficacy scale, we don't have enough data to give another CDK4 once they progress on a CDK4. So ideal for this time, of course, as Rachna told, will be to start chemotherapy and buy time to arrive at the results of the test, like a rebiopsy.
Jovita, you agree with that? This is the right time to introduce the chemotherapy in a HR positive. So far, she has been received is only in the neoadjuvant setting and the adjuvant setting.
Sir, I have a second thought on this. That is, we could actually continue the same CDK4/6 as a stopgap until the time we receive the PIK3CA mutation result. And the moment we receive that, we have the liberty to, prescribe alpelisib. I think that would be a wiser decision rather than to explore to a second CDK4/6 or jump into chemotherapy.
You don't agree with the rest of the panel members that this is a visceral crisis. This is the point of visceral crisis. The patient is symptomatic with the pleural fluid effusion. So this is not a visceral crisis. This is
this is what goes because you could actually drain the fluid and still, in 10 days or 14 days, I think we'll be getting the result, right?
So let's see what I have done. Next slide, please. So we have discussed what you want to introduce. Some of the members are talking on chemotherapy, right time to introduce the chemotherapy. So let me see what I have done. Next slide. I thought this is a visceral crisis. This is the right time to introduce the chemotherapy to salvage the patient. So I started on a paclitaxel. The patient has been exposed to already a taxane in the form of dosi, and the patient has been exposed to carboplatinum compounds, and patient has been exposed to epirubicin. So patient has been exposed to anthracycline and taxanes and platinum compounds. So at this time, I thought I will go ahead with the nanoparticle paclitaxel. Any of the panel members differ with me and want to have any other choice of chemotherapy or any other choice of treatment? Any of the panel members, Jovita, other than Jovita? Suman? Raja?
Gemcitabine-based.
Gemcitabine-based. Okay. Suman?
Sir, I'll go with Nanoxol or Lipodox.
Lipodox.
So either of these ranges are fine.
I'll go with Nanoxol, sir.
Nanoxol. We started on Nanoxol plus urinic acid. What do you expect now? Tell me, what do you expect? You expect a good response for the chemotherapy?
I don't really expect a good response in this case.
Jovita doesn't expect. Rachna, what do you expect?
Not much of a good response, sir.
At least a stable disease. At least a stable disease.
Yes, sir. At least a stable disease.
At least a stable disease with your one of the best chemotherapy choice of chemotherapy. Why? Why you want to say it's a stable disease?
So the disease is being progressing rapidly after the adjuvant therapy, rapidly progressing with the CDK4/6 inhibitors. We have come to the third line of the disease, so maybe.
Suman, what do you expect?
Sir, I'd expect a dramatic response for the first 3-4 cycles. And then
I also thought at least I will achieve a partial response. I never thought about a dramatic response as Suman was talking about, and I never thought I thought I will get at least a partial response. That's what we down the line at the second, third line you expect at the most is the best response will be. Unfortunately, the patient progressed after 6 cycles of Nanoxol. Now the patient progressed. Next slide, please. Now what to do? Before going to do what to do, the 10th month she was accessed this time. She came with the progression of the lung disease, bone disease. Now bone has been involved everywhere. The chemo does not work, didn't work at all. Now, Rachna, What is your response for the scenario? Rachna?
Yes, sir. I'm there. Yeah.
What is your response after seeing the scenario which I wrote?
The
Really,
hormone positive breast cancer, sometimes we may not expect a good response to chemotherapy. They generally have a lower Ki-67. So maybe we could, sir?
This tumor is not responding so great with the Roxana. Also,
Yes.
this tumor is not responding to your best chemotherapy, choice of best chemotherapy which you have.
Yes.
This is because of the differential positivity.
Could be, or it could be because of the other mutations like the ESR1 mutation, which could be there.
Yes. This is
Which
the right
might be
time.
causing
This is the right time to do the PIK3.
So because the patient has already received a fulvestrant, doing a PIK3 is not the wrong thing, but I don't know if we can be able to target it with alpelisib at this point, again using the fulvestrant which was used along with the CDK4/6 inhibitor.
You want to go for mTOR inhibitor?
Yes, sir. I would prefer an mTOR inhibitor at this point.
You want to go with the everolimus plus exemestane?
Yes, the everolimus plus exemestane.
Bolero 2 trial, you want to go with the everolimus exemestane?
Yes, sir. Based on the Bolero 2, I would prefer exemestane plus everolimus at this point of time.
Suman, you want to do a PIK3 mutation now with the redo biopsy.
Yes. I would like to do the full thing.
PIK3
mutation. HER2.
PIK3 mutation is the present, then you go and do a alpelisib.
Is there any change in HER2 status? That I see. And then.
But it's hardly, as the presentation was in the didactic lecture, it's hardly 18% or less than 20%. You get many of the times you don't get you get only 80%. You will have a concordance rate.
Yes.
So only hardly less than 20% you get a discard.
Primary resistance we do ESR1 also.
ESR1 also. Right? Routinely you do ESR1 in the endocrine resistant, primary endocrine resistance.
Any patients who develop resistance within a year. So we generally do to document primary resistance.
Okay. Jovita, you are correct. You are correct that the patient didn't respond to the chemotherapy, the Noxol. Now what do you do?
Definitely PIK3 CA mutation, sir, and then I'll take it forward from there.
You don't want to use everolimus plus exemestane?
I'm very skeptical about that combination, and I'm not very comfortable, sir.
Because of
that a lot of patients don't really tolerate them.
Toxicity of the mucositis with everolimus, you are bothered about that mucositis?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a scenario. Now we started on everolimus plus exemestane in this month. Let me see how she does. I use quite a lot of down the line in the fourth or fifth line. I do use the everolimus, but of course you have the toxicity of mucositis. Let's see how she does in subsequent meeting. If I happen to, I will review how the patient is doing. This month only we started on thing. Next one. So this is a little bit on thing. Maybe some of the maybe repetition. So these endocrine therapies are the one which now with the combination with the targeted agents is the first line management. Next one, unless otherwise there is a visceral crisis. Next one. So next one. These are all everybody has talked on that. So 50%. This endocrine resistance is the one. Let's not think that it's a cakewalk. The HR positive tumors are the cakewalk thing when compared to the triple negative, where that I have seen a huge number of triple negative where that's a huge unmet need. But even in some subset of the HR positive, HER2 negative tumors also, you come across this kind of rapid progression. Of course, there are other mutations down the line like the PIK3 as well as the AKT. Now we have different druggable mutations are now the targets are being exposed, and now many drugs are in the pipeline with the AKT also, inhibitors also. Next one. Okay, everybody talked on that. Next one. So not much difference between three CDK4 inhibitors. Of course, in Abima has got a little more potent than that, more 30% more potent than ribo, but ribo's got more CDK4 action. So in a real world scenario, not much difference between and the three CDK4/6 inhibitors. And as someone was talking about, some side effect profile favors the ribo because the neutropenia is recoverable and manageable. And the Abima, the people are talking about the continuous one. Where here it is only 3 weeks on and 1 week off, so more advantage using a continuous therapy. So it's all theoretical one, but not much difference between all three cyclips. Next one. So we have various trials with the Palamo, where you have Palamo 3 is the one where majority of the trial, except for the Mona Lisa 3, where the OL certain benefit is there, all that they had only PFS advantage. Next one. So these combination, which combination has to be used, all depends upon the drug the patient receives in the adjuvant setting. So many of them will be receiving the AA in the adjuvant settings. That's the reason why the fulminant becomes the first line choice. And in high risk patients, the subset where the fulminant with the ribo is the preferred one when compared to the AI plus one. And next one, in premenopausal, you have to go with the OS. Ovarian suppression also, and then Monarch, the Abima has shown the PFS advantage. No overall survival benefit is not mature. Now we're all being pushed to the adjuvant setting as well as in the neoadjuvant setting. Next one. So many of them maybe have reputation. Next slide. So this is very important. This slide is very important. These endocrine resistant tumors on progressing on CDK4 inhibitor, which are the mutations, mainly is an ESR1 mutation, as someone is talking about, and various biomarkers has been identified. You have to find out which are the subset of the patient who has to go for the CDK4 inhibitor upfront. Various biomarkers has been tried, but none of them found to be very robust. CCND1 is the one biomarker which has been found very little useful in identifying the subset of the patients who may benefit from the frontline targeted agent of CDK4 inhibitor plus an endocrine therapy. So the percentage of the mutations is CCND1, ESR1, the FGFR, and the PIK3 and TP53. These are all now becoming druggable mutation. 3 is now we got the drug, and ESR1 and CCD1, RB1 being becoming a good biomarker finding the resistance of the drug. Next one. As you can see, the resistance in the 40% may have an intrinsic resistance, and the rest of the 60% may acquire the resistance. So various mutations, right from the ESR1 to FGFR1 and to EGFR and PIK3 has been identified as the TP53 has been identified as the MYC1 also. Next one. So this is a biomarker where the CCN1 and CCND1 as expressions have been identified as a biomarker, a predictive biomarker, as in the Palamo 3 trial, where the patients who are having a CC1 expression below median do better with the PAL plus fulminant when compared to the above median. So low cyclin E1 versus high cyclin E1. So low cyclin E1 patients do have better PFS when compared to the high cyclin E1. So these biomarkers have been now getting validated, not yet validated, but these are very not a robust. This is very unmet need to find out which are the subset of the patients who will be beneficial this upfront CDK4/6 inhibitor. Next one. And can you go back to the previous slide? 1 minute. As you can see, these biomarker, this is when the metastatic is primary tissues, more pronounced in the metastatic. So where do you do a biopsy in a metastatic setting? For the metastatic, this is a real debate whether to do it from the metastatic site or from the primary site. Which one you want to do it from a metastatic site or the primary site? Biopsy.
Sir, most preferable will be from the metastatic site. But most of the mutations that we talk about are dominant mutation by themselves, like HER2 or PIK3. So most of the time doesn't matter. But if given a choice, I'll be doing it rather on a metastatic site. The most active site on a PET scan will be the most ideal.
But theoretically, the metastatic and the one which has got the recent clonal evolution of the mutation, so they may reflect the true picture of that. But ctDNA may show you the real dynamics of the mutation. That's an advantage of using a ctDNA when compared to the tissue mutation study from the tissue. So these in the PALAMO-3, they found that the low cyclin E1 is more pronounced in the metastatic versus primary. They have found it's more pronounced in the metastatic side. Next one. So PI3, Anita stopped extensively on the PI3. Now we have the downstream targets are being coming up. This is AKT inhibitors, next one, where we have now drugs in the trial, phase 1 and phase 2 trials on AKT inhibitors also. Next one. So these all everything she talked on. Venkat, my time is over. Otherwise, I wind up.
Dr. Rajkumar, yes, we are crossed the time. Thank you very much. Dr. Venkat, thanks to all these speakers, to the panelists. Dr. Venkatraman? Dr. Venkatraman is there. If you can give the concluding remarks. I don't know whether he is there. Okay.
Sir, you'll have to unmute your mic.
Thank you, madam. I was unable to unmute. I think this was a wonderful series of talks by all the speakers. It was excellent and I learned a lot. And what is important is that these drugs are coming as they're coming. We as clinicians need to know about their side effects and we need to know how to sequence them properly so that our patients benefit the most. And I have no experience giving a PI3 kinase inhibitors, but now after listening to this talk, I know what to look for and what to expect and how to counsel my patients. There are plenty of CDK4 inhibitors, and I think the choice would depend on, again, the patient profile and the toxicity profile. So with these remarks, I would like to conclude, and I would like to thank the organizers and all the speakers and the panelists for a wonderful session. Thank you very much and good night.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks to Kavina Creation. Thanks to everybody who joined us, and have a safe day, safe stay, and stay healthy, and we'll meet again. Thank you so much.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.